Добрий день.
Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Olga Atamanova, and Ukraine Media Center continues its operation. Today, we will be talking about an interesting and important topic. We will be talking about mobilization, the condition of mobilization, the pace of mobilization, and some new implementations that we should expect. For joining us in the studio is Fedir Venislavskyi, a member of the Ukrainian Parliament's Committee on National Security, Defense and Intelligence. Good afternoon, Mr. Fedir. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. So let's start a conversation with the pace of mobilization. We keep seeing different figures in the media. So what is the pace for the time being? And also, what is the number of people drafted for the time being, if we can disclose those numbers? Well, obviously, we cannot disclose that number. It's a matter of national security. It's top secret information. The Committee on the National Security, Defense and Intelligence has all of the figures on mobilization pace. Well, I would answer your question in the following way. When the draft law was initiated, the one that we've adopted on improvement of mobilization procedures, the mobilization did not have such a momentum that would satisfy the top-level command of the armed forces of Ukraine. And after we fulfilled the work in coordination with the Ministry of Defense and other representatives of the security and defense sector, we've come up with this law that came into force, that is in effect for 3 months already. And it evidences the fact that the situation with mobilization pace is completely satisfactory for the military command, and President Zelensky confirmed it. He stated that the pace of mobilization satisfies the Commander-in-Chief General Syrsky, so the mobilization covers the requirements of the armed forces for formation of reserves and drafting to make sure that the units of our security and defense forces continue doing their job in a proper way. So in your opinion, what helped to reinforce this process, to launch it? Well, first of all, I would like to remind you about the goal of this law. We wanted to register all of the people who can potentially take part in defending our territorial sovereignty and territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. Within the first month of war, we had a lot of internally displaced persons. Many people left Ukraine. Many men were attempting to leave Ukraine. And the representatives of the conscription offices, before the law has come into force, before they started complying with that law, many conscripts, they were not registered with the conscription offices. There was no relevant information about the males that are subject to the draft age from 18 to 60 years, like who of them is staying abroad, who can be mobilized due to their health conditions and who cannot, who have a right to postponement. But again, I'm not going to give you the exact figures, but as we were reviewing the draft law, the representatives of the Ministry of Defense and the general staff were paying attention to the fact that among those people who have 100% right to the postponement and another category, those ones who were booking, they were not compliant with the requirements of the law. They were not updating their registration data. So basically, we were not able to bring order to that area, so we have to review it in retrospective. I would say the system of military registration on paper, it was destroyed, and the electronic document turnover, the electronic document flow has not come into effect as per the law, and we had that gap between the actual number of those who can be mobilized and those who were registered with the conscription offices. Basically, we achieved that goal. You know that millions of citizens updated their registration data through Reserve Plus application. Hundreds of thousands updated their data through the Centers for Administrative Support and conscription offices, and now we have understanding of the human potential, human resources, the pool that can be used in the sector of the security and defense. So we've achieved our goal, basically. And I think that thanks to the fact that the representatives of the conscription offices don't waste financial, material, and human resources going to those places where the people subject to the draft may potentially be, they have objective picture of where those people are staying, and they can fulfill all of their mobilization tasks. So basically you want to say that the implementation of Reserve Plus application was efficient. Well, if we check the statistics of updates of the registration data that the citizens of Ukraine updated using Reserve Plus, so we may safely state that it significantly improved the situation, because the majority of the citizens use those electronic opportunities. I mean, those who live abroad, those who stay in Ukraine, and until this day they continue using Reserve Plus to update their registration data. So basically that mission that we expected to be fulfilled is fulfilled. Well, there's a lot of discussions around Reserve Plus applications, and many keep asking whether the electronic subpoenas will be served through Reserve Plus. Well, I think that we should put a period in this discussion. So there are no technical problems with notification of the people subject to draft, but there is a political will of the president, executive authority, that Reserve Plus and other electronic means of electronic communication with the citizens will not be used for serving subpoenas. There's the political will, and on top of that, to implement any new things, everything should be discussed in the legislative level. There are no legislative initiatives related to electronic communication, electronic serving of subpoenas through Reserve Plus do not exist. And no such initiatives are being registered so far, and there are no grounds to discuss it. The political will is obvious. There are no legal grounds for that. So there was a lot of discussion around demobilization. We remember that long and complicated process. So what is the story behind that? To what extent is demobilization being discussed? Well, is the most sensitive, the most complex question. We become hostages to the populist ideas of some politicians who threw in those ideas in the public space as the legislative initiatives for the people subject to the draft to be relieved from military service during the martial law. This matter was discussed in the committee. The story of the wars doesn't know cases, the history of the war doesn't know any cases about complex demobilization of those fighting for territorial integrity and state sovereignty. So this matter is not only of political nature, but it's also of the security and defense nature. We would like to give hope to those people who are staying in the front lines that they will be able to retire shortly, but the situation in the front lines remains complicated. And if we analyze the activities of aggressor country who try to increase their personnel taking part against Ukraine in their aggression, during our committee meetings we have analytics about the financial encouragement for the mercenaries in their aggressive Russian army, and they can make from 1 to 2 million rubles as they sign the contract, and that pace is growing because those initiatives are growing through the regions of Russian Federation due to the level of life of the Russians. Those are fantastic money for them, and as the data from our intelligence says, it comes to, such a cynical and paradoxical evaluation of situation when our intelligence intercepts telephone communication. When the relatives say, like, if you die in the front lines, that's okay, because what the government pays will be enough for us to cover our needs for the decades to come. So those are realities existing in Russia. And again, According to the details that we have from the intelligence, Russia has the goal to increase their occupational personnel in Ukraine per maybe hundreds of thousands. And in the background of that information, it's difficult to talk about any retirement from our armed forces. But again, in that law that we've adopted, the parliament tasked the cabinet of ministers, who is the key player in the building of the defense policy of our country, to make relevant amendments or initiate relevant draft law. But according to the information that I have, there is no initiation of such draft law so far. So I wouldn't be very optimistic, and I would not expect for it to come anytime shortly. And again, another sensitive topic, the decrease of mobilization age. Is it being discussed now? There are no initiatives to implement lower conscription age below 2,500 years. No such initiatives were expressed by the representatives of General Staff, Ministry of Defense, or else. So there are no grounds to talk about decrease of mobilization age. That is an issue touched upon by our partners who provide us with the military aid and support, because they think that age from 18 to 25 years is the best age for the people due to their psychological and physical properties to fulfill their tasks in the front lines. But there are no initiatives on part of the President or Cabinet of Ministers or Parliament so far. Also, are there such initiatives being discussed as to exempt certain categories of population from military service? Well, now the committee, just recently, just yesterday during its meeting, adopted a draft law on exemption of certain categories, specifically the citizens of Ukraine aged 18 to 25 years, who were recognized subject to restricted draft. So they were switched to the category of those subject to the draft. They were getting the military profession that was rendering them subject to restricted service during the peacetime and subject to military service during the martial law. And those citizens ended up in unequal situation with their age stakes, age 21 to 25. There were no cases of mobilization of those aged 15 and 19, but our committee unanimously supported the amendments to the legislation, and as it's contemplated by the basic law, the citizens of Ukraine who have military profession and have not achieved the year of 25 years cannot be mobilized. But again, this restriction does not cover the people subject to draft who underwent the term military service, who underwent the draft, and they can be mobilized, and also those who acquired the officer rank through the military chairs in the higher educational institutions. They consciously have chosen the way of the officer, and they can be mobilized without achieving the age of 25 years. And in those terms, I would like to adhere to the legal clarity, because talking about demobilization is switching to the peaceful way of life. We can only discuss the retirement of certain categories of the servicemen. The committee has come up with the initiative already, because those initiatives that were registered in the parliament, they contemplated what I was talking about just now. But there is certain number of those. They are not so numerous, maybe a couple of hundreds of the people subject to draft who were subject to restricted service. And we thought about that category of citizens in our committee, and we've recommended to the Parliament of Ukraine to adopt the amendments to the law that would allow personnel to retire if they don't want to continue military service, specifically for that category of people, those who were subject to restricted service, then mobilized, and now we contemplate the opportunity for them to get retired, but not for the other ones. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I would like to give you the opportunity to ask your questions from the floor. Microphones, please. Good afternoon. Afternoon on Novena Live. We started your discussion with the statement that the mobilization is satisfactory for everybody, the parliament, the cabinet of ministers, and so on and so forth. So how do we approach this situation when people are being packed in the trucks, sent to the medical examination, and then sent to the polygon, to the training field? Well, as a lawyer, I have to get a clear understanding of the situation. If people got subpoenas as those who can be mobilized, is they've got the relevant notice served to them, and if they don't show up, it allows, in compliance with the law, the national police, a person who can be put on a wanted list, to be delivered to the conscription office and sent to the training center. That's one situation. Another thing is that, unfortunately, the representatives of the conscription offices are live people. They have nerves, and they also sometimes violate the law. We respond to such cases properly on the level of our committee, Ministry of Defense, General Staff. All cases of violations are being thoroughly investigated. If there are grounds to initiate a criminal proceeding, such cases are registered too. So any unlawful activities by representatives of conscription offices are being clearly investigated. So what would be your advice for a person who ended up in such a situation? Should they write a letter? Should they report to your committee? What to do? Well, if people ended up in a situation which have signs of violation of law by the representatives of conscription office, they can contest such activities in the courts. Also, you can report to the official address, the email address of our committee. We investigate such cases, as I've already mentioned, and they are properly responded to. Thank you very much. More questions? Vitaly Zalevsky, Channel 5, can you please tell us? We've seen the news saying that if people don't update their registration data through any resources, they will be penalized. So how will this procedure work? Yeah, that's a clear procedure. We've adopted it with the underlying law as we were making amendments to the Code on Administrative Violations. There are penalties prescribed there. For the representatives of conscription offices, they are entitled to issue the notice of violation. Those are clearly the requirements of the law. If people violate those requirements, they can be brought to administrative liability. And just like any other document that contemplates any enforcement, they are being sent to the government enforcement service, and then those penalties are being enforced due to a normal procedure like arresting of accounts and other assets that can be used as enforcement for fulfilling of this requirement. So is it safe to state that that procedure has already started working, that it came into effect? Well, it did, but I cannot give you the exact number of the people who were already brought to administrative liability. I can give you this number during our next meetings. More questions, please. When you were saying about the number of people who have updated their personal details, their registration details, now the military command can evaluate the mobilization potential and serve subpoenas to them. So what about those who have not updated their personal details? Will those who have already updated get the subpoenas first, or will those who violated or still are violating the law will not be served? So basically, if people do not fulfill their responsibilities according to the law, they will be properly penalized. And those citizens of Ukraine who comply with those criteria that are being formulated by the general staff, like experience of military service, military profession, and so on and so forth, those people can be mobilized regardless of the fact whether they updated or have not updated their personal details. But again, the priority number one is to carefully select the personnel for mobilization. And let me remind you that as we were considering this law, we've agreed upon the authorizations of the local governments, central government, law enforcement agencies, and in my opinion, they all work properly in cooperation today. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Do we have any more questions on the floor? If we do not have, thank you very much for your conversation. Let's continue working for our victory. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.